Slowly, the panic died down, at least enough for the captain to check that the rest of his team were all right. Everyone accounted for, except for the medic, of course, and with nothing worse than a bruise or two. The Stats weren't so lucky. 3 of them were dead. 2 from blunt force trauma, and 1 from having its arm pulled clean out of its socket. There was no use mourning them now, however. The creature could be back at any moment. The captain hesitated, but he still had 10 members of his crew he needed to get to safety. The medic would understand. The next section was only 150 meters away. Left, right, left again. All the time waiting for the motion detector to go off again. But nothing happened, and suddenly they were there. Safety. Still, the captain didn't let himself relax until the heavy vacuum-proof doors closed. It was only then that he thought to check the biomonitors in his crew's suits. He wanted to make sure that the injured weren't seriously hurt. The biomonitors were fairly basic and no substitute for a full exam, but it was better than nothing. Fortunately, their vital signs were all within normal tolerances. They'd been knocked about a bit, but they'd be fine. However, when the captain opened the display on his suit's visor, he noticed something else. The medic was still alive. He ran a diagnostic, making sure that he was still looking at current data and it wasn't on some sort of time delay. Nope. This was the current telemetry. The medic was definitely still alive. His vital signs were still strong, too. The captain then brought up a map. Every suit had a tracker in it, and the medic's was still broadcasting. He wasn't even that far away, only a few hundred meters and 2 levels up. The captain thought long and hard about what he was going to do next. When things get tough, you don't abandon your flock. Every Amia is raised knowing that. However, when you get older, get given a position of responsibility, you learn that things aren't always that simple. There are always risks when you're out in deep space, but they're usually risks like a malfunctioning reactor or a toxic leak from the cargo. Pulling a crewmate out of a burning engine room was brave, but taking on an alien predator? That was just crazy. He was only a freighter captain. He wasn't some long-range explorer. He didn't sign up to go boldly into the unknown, and he certainly didn't sign up to fight monsters. The sensible thing to do would be to make sure the rest of his crew was safe, and accept that there was nothing he could do for the medic now. But he was still a captain, and when he took the job, he accepted responsibility for everyone under his command. He'd told the Stats that his first duty was to the safety of his ship. That was important, sure. They needed those supplies on Miayan 4, but above all else, as captain, it was his duty to make sure his crew got home again. All of them. After a quick conversation with the safety officer, the captain made his decision. The Stats were surprised when he told them there was a change of plans, but not half as much as the rest of the Amia. It took some arguing, but in the end they agreed. They would continue on to the transport pod and take the rest of the team back to the Lightfeather's shuttle. The captain and the safety officer would go back for the ship's medic. The Stats didn't like anyone making a decision without consulting, well, everyone. But they also didn't care if 2 Amia wanted to get themselves killed. They left him one of the motion detectors and continued on escorting the rest of the rescue team to the transport pod. Once they'd gone, the safety officer got the stunners out of his pack. There are always 2 on a freighter with a crew of 4 or more, and only the captain and the safety officer are trained to use them. Long sticks that fire an electrical pulse. Simple weapons, but effective. If one of the crew has a psychotic episode, and it can happen out in the void, then the stunners allow his shipmates to subdue him without hurting him. Much. It's designed to be non-fatal, but it still hurts like hell. Normally, the captain would never have brought weapons on board someone else's ship, especially not without asking them first. But this was the Stats they were dealing with, and he'd had a feeling they were hiding something. He told the security officer to bring the stunners, keep them hidden, and only use them as a last resort. This seemed like a last resort. As they waited by the door dividing the sections, he tried raising the medic on comms a couple of times. Nothing. It occurred to the captain that even if the creature hadn't eaten him already, it probably wasn't doing anything pleasant with him. But his vital signs were still strong, and as long as that green line held, then there was still hope. After a few minutes, the door opened. The captain breathed a sigh of relief. Whatever else happened, the others had reached the transport pod. He looked at the safety officer without even needing to say it. You don't have to do this, you know. But the safety officer was through the door before the captain. It was his job to identify potential hazards to the crew and keep them out of harm's way. He'd been trained to keep a cool head under pressure. Maybe no one had ever expected a situation like this when they were giving him that training, but this was definitely a hazard, and there was a crewman in harm's way. They retraced their steps and found an access shaft that allowed them to go up 2 levels using their jets. Then they started following the medic's tracker beacon. The captain kept a close eye on the motion sensor, but it was quiet as the grave. 1 intersection, 2, 3. They crept down the empty corridors, suit lamps piercing through the darkness, and found nothing. They were getting close. The medic must be somewhere along the next corridor. That came from behind them. The captain spun round, but once again all he saw was an empty corridor. The motion sensor was definitely picking up something in the direction they'd just come. The captain and the safety officer looked at each other. Then they broke into a run. The medic's suit tracker was still registering just a little way ahead. The creature must have stashed him for later and then gone out to hunt down the rest of their group. Maybe they still had a chance. Get in, get the medic, and get out before the creature realized they'd doubled back. The captain's legs were starting to hurt. He wasn't used to using them for so long, but it couldn't be far now. Suddenly, the safety officer stuck his arm out, bringing him to a halt, and in an instant, the captain saw why. There was a hatch there. Not a large one, like the section divider, so there was probably just a small room through there. From the position of beacon on the medic's suit, he must be just on the other side. The captain hesitated. You never opened a door on a spacecraft if you didn't know what it led to. Dangerous machinery, radiation, anything. If the atmospheres weren't equalized, and that was a real danger on this ship, they could be blown back into the wall behind them. The captain sprang forward and pressed the button. The door swished open. Instantly, the captain knew 2 things. The first was that he should never have trusted the Stat-Stan when they told him there was only 1 intruder aboard. The second was that they were as good as dead. His wings flexed inside his suit, trying to fly for cover. The captain half-turned, but when his wings just hit the inside of his suit, it shocked him enough to think about what he was doing. There was no cover here, but he had the stunner. The captain brought up his weapon and depressed the firing button. Too slow, far too slow. His target was already moving. The safety officer fired, but he missed too. The captain adjusted his aim, already knowing it was futile, already knowing what was coming at him, but he had to try. He was just about to press the firing button again when the stunner was ripped out of his hand. The safety officer lost his weapon a split second later. Then they were just standing there, face to face with it. A human. The safety officer half-turned, instinct finally winning out, then just collapsed. Adrenaline faint. When an EMEA's panic instinct activates but they can't use that burst of energy to fly to cover, it often causes an overload that knocks them out. Saves you from having a heart attack, but not great in a dangerous situation. Right then, however, the captain envied him. No one could survive a human, not in any kind of combat, and certainly not up close like this. They still weren't well known outside their little corner of the galaxy, but the EMEA had investigated and gathered a certain amount of information on them. Carnivorous, aggressive, brutally strong, fast, and tough. Insane predatory instinct, to the point where they frequently hunted each other, as well as anything else that came within reach. The EMEA government had sent observers in during the conflict with the Kalukamsku, and what they'd brought back, well, the captain had seen some of the vids. Whatever the human was about to do to him, he just hoped it was quick. It was just standing there. It was wearing a white spacesuit, not too different from the captain's own, although obviously made to fit a human form. A little taller than him, but much bulkier. Most ground-dwelling species are, of course. Flight is a huge advantage for the EMEA, but it does mean we're relative lightweights for our size. The captain was fairly confident that if it wanted to, the human could rip his limbs off one by one, then fold him in half for good measure. But it was just standing there. The captain became aware of a presence behind him. Something picked him up and the safety officer and shoved them both into the room. Then the door closed, with a hiss of finality. 2 humans. Now he was in an enclosed space with two humans. He caught a flash of movement at the corner of his vision, and a third human came into view. All three were wearing bone-white spacesuits that, to an Amia, looked disturbingly skeletal. They were all just standing there. This was what he got for trusting the Statstan. The captain realized there was only one thing left for him to do now. He opened his comm system to tell the light feather to pick up the rest of the crew, then get as far away from here as possible. Then he noticed that there was an alert on his comm system. It was picking up a signal on a new frequency. Almost on reflex, the captain selected it. An audio transmission, or at least that was what it looked like. He opened it. "Hello? Hello? Can you hear me? Can your translation matrix process this?" Yeah, that's right, they were trying to talk to him. You can imagine how shocked the captain was. Could have knocked him down with a feather, as we Amia say. The only sentient predator species in the galaxy, and instead of trying to eat him, they were trying to talk to him. Which was when it dawned on him, they're sentient. They may be carnivorous, but they're sentient. Maybe, just maybe, there was a chance for him to talk his way out of this. So he replied, "Yes, I can understand you." He wanted to add, "Please don't eat me." But he didn't fully trust his translation program to deal with human language, and even with perfect translation, there's still the chance of cultural misunderstandings. So he decided to stay away from the whole topic of killing him and keep everything simple. He started by asking, "What do you want?" The answer surprised him almost as much as the fact that he was still alive. He followed up with another question, and another, and slowly he started to get an idea of what was really going on here. It had all started a few weeks earlier. A human cargo ship called the Idaho had been on a mission out to Upau-Rokvau territory. Just an ordinary trade run, except not ordinary for humans because that's a hell of a long way for them. Their FTL drives are pretty primitive, and they have very few ships capable of crossing that kind of distance. They were 4 months into the trip when their FTL drive broke down. Far, far beyond the range of any possibility that another human ship would come across them. So they sent out a general distress call, and guess who answered? That's right, the Statstan city ship. Now, if you or I answered a distress signal, it would be because we actually wanted to help. But that's not how the Statstan think. They found the Idaho drifting, helpless, and they checked its configuration against the list of species they have bilateral agreements with. Not Amia, not Velian, not Tok. In fact, the ship design was one they'd never encountered before. The files said, "Human. Don't think the Statstan didn't know what a human was. They exchange information with the rest of the galaxy. Their databases contain as much information on all the various spacefaring species as anyone, even the obscure ones." But they'd never encountered humans directly before, which meant they didn't have any treaties with them, which meant they had no obligation to help. A species which had the tiniest sliver of an instinct for compassion would have thought to themselves, "Well, we can't just leave them out here. We have to do something for them." A species which had any amount of common sense would have thought, "Maybe we should stay away from a ship full of humans. But these are the Statstan we're talking about." So they thought, "Hey, nice free ship, that's right." Those geniuses found a human-disabled ship, and they decided to just take it for themselves. A human ship. I told you the first time I heard this story I didn't believe it, because surely, even the Statstan aren't that stupid. But apparently they are. I saw the logs and I still can barely believe it, but they really are that dumb. The city ship dragged the Idaho into its shuttle bay, and the auto factory started carving it up. Keep in mind, the humans thought up till this point that the Statstan were coming to help them. Nasty surprise for them, although the Statstan were about to have a worse one. As the industrial cutters started slicing into their hull, they had to scramble for their spacesuits and make a run for the emergency airlocks. 11 of them didn't make it. The other 38, however, got off their ship in time before it was torn apart for components. I guess the Statstan just assumed that anyone on board the ship would die as they were taking it apart, and they wouldn't have to worry about them. But 38 humans managed to evacuate and found an opening that led them into the machinery of the auto factory. And somehow, they made it through without getting crushed or cut up, and activated an airlock. It didn't take the Statstan long to realize that they'd picked up passengers. At first, they tried to deal with the humans by containing them, but humans are a reasonably intelligent species, and the Statston liked to keep their ships simple. The humans quickly worked out they could move through the ventilation system, and given enough time, they could break open the door controls and bypass the lockouts. From there, it progressed more or less as the Statston had told the Amia earlier. First, they sent in the modified repair drones. These huge, lumbering robots actually managed to kill 3 of the humans, partly because the humans still weren't sure what was going on and whether it was just an interspecies misunderstanding. I should mention, by the way, that the crew of the Idaho wasn't part of the human hunter caste. They're military. Well, their captain and 2 of the crew were ex-military, but all the rest were considered non-combatants by human standards. They were ordinary space freight workers like us. Pilots, navigators, engineers, cargo supervisors. They were as unprepared as humans get to face lethal violence. But these are humans we're talking about. Being humans, they quickly adapted to the new threat trying to exterminate them, because when you live on a world full of humans, there's lethal danger around every corner. Led by their captain, using what he remembered from his military training, they worked out that the drones had blind spots, and although they were powerful, they were slow. The Statston simply weren't used to designing weapons, and soon every drone they sent out was methodically obliterated by a combination of the humans' tactical superiority and their innate, raw aggression. As the humans were explaining this part to the captain of the Light Feather, one of them mentioned that after a while it seemed like a video game boss battle. The drones were much bigger than them, but they had weak spots and they moved predictably. The captain then had to ask them what a video game was, and apparently it's a kind of educational or entertainment simulation humans use. They come in many varieties, and a lot of them aren't too different from our VR sims, but by far the biggest genre is where something horrifying is trying to kill you, and you have to kill them first. They do this for fun, from childhood. Maybe if the Statston had known this, they wouldn't have started sending patrols out to hunt down their unwelcome stowaways. At first, the humans tried to avoid them, but the Statston knew their own ship, and they carefully planned their routes to herd the humans into their line of fire. As lacking in common sense as they are, Statston are still a highly intelligent species, and if you give them a problem they can reduce down to mathematics, they will solve it with no problem. Unfortunately for them, humans don't need complex mathematics to work out a hunting pattern. They do that kind of thing instinctively. They understood what the occupants of the city ship were doing, so they decided to introduce them to some of the basic concepts of human warfare, starting with the ambush. As the captain of the Light Feather listened to the details of what the humans did to the Statston who were trying to purge them from the city ship, he realized something. They were confused. Not confused over why the Statston were trying to kill them, like a sane person would be. All their media, from the moment a human first realized there might be other life among the stars, had been preparing them for that. Before first contact, they assumed that alien species would be hostile predators, and because first contact was with the Kalukamsku, it persisted for a while after that as well. No, they were confused over why massacring the Statston had been so easy. It wasn't that the Statston were slow, not like the Kalukamsku. The Statston had reaction times almost as fast as a human, and they could move remarkably quickly when they had a handhold overhead to swing from. But when the humans ambushed them, they were useless, even when they heavily outnumbered their targets. Many would drop their weapons and flee, and the ones that tried to stay and fight were terrible at it. Their aim was all over the place, and as soon as a human got within striking distance, their only defensive move was to curl into a ball. The humans had been expecting that the aliens who destroyed their ship, the aliens who had been relentlessly hunting them down, would be some kind of aggressive super predator. Like, well, humans. They were baffled that their enemy was so harmless.